It does not require multiple years of development. It is simply the instructions for the genes that then help in creating antibodies. They do not, the Pfizer and Moderna, they do not contain pieces or portions of the coronavirus. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine that had emergency use approval yesterday has a small component of the virus contained in the vehicle that administers it to your body. So it takes a while to develop that type of vaccine. You can see how long it's taken into 2021. But the Pfizer and Moderna messenger RNA vaccines have been in use. We've used them on human beings in the treatment of prostate cancer and lung cancer many years ago. The technology has been in existence for over 20 years. And this COVID pandemic has really fueled the research behind it that brought it to market at the size and scale that it's reaching a global population. So had it not been for the COVID pandemic, the technology would have been there. The technology has been used, and we've treated with immunotherapy, we've treated individuals, human beings, with cancer, with the mRNA technology in the past. You haven't heard about it because it really has not been at the scale that it has had to reach all of the population, or frankly, the world. This pandemic has really brought that technology to the forefront, but it is not a technology that the former administration concocted, or it is not a technology that was made up just for COVID. There is a lot of research done on animals as well as primates, which are animals that are mammals as well, before testing it on people with other conditions in the past before using that same platform to now treat COVID. So it is not new. It was not developed by the former administration in Washington. And we should have peace of mind from that standpoint. It was not rushed to the market simply for an ulterior motive. You may think that, you know what, others probably should be in line before me. But to be honest with you, the strategy now in Florida actually is for the small amount of doses that are making their way into the state, for us to actually vaccinate. And Advent Health has done that, and other health systems have done this within the state. We have vaccinated those that are considered extremely vulnerable. They've had a lung transplant or a heart transplant or a bone marrow transplant. They're immunocompromised. They have sickle cell anemia or cystic fibrosis. They have these chronic conditions that put them at risk. We are vaccinating those populations when the vaccine is made available. So the fact that perhaps there are others that are more prioritized that should go before me, we are addressing them. And that is not a reason for you to say others should be receiving this. When my opportunity comes, let me sit back and wait, because the importance of being vaccinated, we'll touch on that in just a moment. We are vaccinating those that are extremely vulnerable when the vaccine is available. And now, when it is your turn, we strongly encourage you to be vaccinated. Will it work, and is it effective? So we know that the Pfizer and the Mrna vaccines that are currently available to the original strain, now you've heard about these variants that are in the community. And by the mid to end of March, there will be a new variant, a new mutation that becomes the predominant COVID virus within the state. Well, the Pfizer and the Mrna vaccines are 95% effective in preventing moderate and severe COVID. 95%. So the goal is to be vaccinated so that, in essence, COVID virus, which we will be with forever. We have actually lived for many decades with COVID viruses, not COVID-19, but coronaviruses. Coronaviruses cause 40% of the common cold. I don't know if you knew that, but 40% of the common cold is caused by coronaviruses. This coronavirus 19 is different. Obviously, it's more lethal and it's more contagious, but the goal with vaccination at 95% effectiveness is to really say, let's eliminate moderate and severe COVID, 95% of it, so that this coronavirus, which we will have with us for many years, will be nothing more than another cold. And for us to get to that point, we have to be vaccinated. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine that was approved for emergency use yesterday is 72% effective in preventing moderate and severe COVID infection. However, and some might say, well, look, it's less effective in moderate and severe. Maybe I won't get it. Maybe it is not effective. And that's actually false, because what it is 100%, and this is what the data shows, what it is 100% effective in doing is removing or eliminating hospitalizations and deaths. So even at 72% effectiveness against moderate and severe disease, it is 100% effective in reducing the likelihood that you would need to be hospitalized for 2 or 3 days or 5 days or in the intensive care unit for 14 days. And it is also demonstrated to be 100% effective in reducing death, mortality. So when your opportunity arises to receive either the Pfizer or the Mrna or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which we will see more of in March, I strongly encourage you to do so. These are the final thoughts that I want to share with you before opening the floor to any questions and some answers that I can share with you. 10% of people who are infected with COVID-19 and have a mild illness do not require hospitalization, and that's the majority of people who are infected with COVID-19. The illness is mild and they're monitored at home. So 10% of people with mild illness, moderate illness, some of whom are hospitalized, some of whom are monitored at home, or severe illness, 10% of those have what's called long haulers syndrome or symptoms. They continue after the resolution of the acute infection, 10 days, they continue to have fatigue. Months later, they continue to have, or they have a cough, or difficulty concentrating. Their short-term memory is a little off. Who wants to experience that? Nobody. They don't die, but 10% of them have these chronic symptoms. We need to really encourage and stress vaccination so that we prevent even mild infection, so that we prevent moderate and severe disease, to significantly reduce the impact of those symptoms that really can last for months. They can lose their smell, their sense of taste. Imagine not being able to smell outside today, going to the beach and not being able to smell the seaweed. I mean, that's not trivializing it. These are the things that we take for granted. And 10% of people who are infected that have mild, moderate, or severe disease continue to have ongoing and long-term symptoms. Let's do all that we can to get the truth out about these vaccines and to ensure that not only we vaccinate ourselves, but that we put the word out about the safety and the importance of vaccinating our community and getting to that point where 70% of us have either had natural infection, unfortunately, or had the vaccine, so that we are at a point where there's very few people left for this vaccine for the virus to cause moderate or severe disease, and it becomes nothing more than equivalent to the common cold. With those comments, I'll turn over to you all, because I think the greatest value comes from addressing and answering questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sinclair. There is a question on Zoom that says, why should we vaccinate if there's different variants of the COVID-19?
That is a great question. I'll start with the first two vaccines that are available, Mrna and Pfizer. From the research that's been done so far, there has not been any demonstrated reduced effectiveness of those two vaccines against the predominant or the growing variant within the state of Florida, the UK variant. They're continuing to study that. So clearly we want to keep an eye on, is there the potential for reduced effectiveness of the Pfizer and Mrna vaccines to the UK variant? The vaccine that was approved yesterday, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, is 72% effective against the original COVID-19 virus that affected our nation over the last year. But what is well known is that it has reduced effectiveness against the South African variant, is only 65% or 55% effective against that particular variant. We also know that it has some reduced effectiveness against the Brazilian variant. It is not uncommon for these viruses to mutate. But even with the reduced effectiveness, I need to contrast that with the flu vaccine, which you probably received in the fall, where depending on your age, the actual vaccine effectiveness ranges from upper 30% to perhaps 50%. So even the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that was approved for emergency use yesterday by the Food and Drug Administration, with a known reduced effectiveness against the South African variant and the Brazilian variant, is still even more effective than the flu vaccine that you received against the flu in the fall. So these reduced effectiveness, if we only look at it in terms of vaccines that are available, they are still extremely, the importance of having them is still extremely high, and they are still effective in reducing moderate and severe disease caused by those variants. Their effectiveness is not zero. I'm talking about the Johnson & Johnson, for example, because that's the one that has been shown to have reduced effectiveness against the South African variant and the Brazilian variant, which are more contagious. The effectiveness isn't zero. It's not 10%. It's not 40%. The effectiveness is still at 55%, Johnson & Johnson. And there has been no demonstrated, as I mentioned before, significant reduction in the effectiveness of the Pfizer and the Mrna. So even though, I'll say in a nutshell, even though there's reduced effectiveness potentially with vaccines, it is not zero, and it is also not even 50%. They are still quite effective when you look at them relative to the flu vaccine, which you and I think is the gold standard. We receive those and we go about our lives. These vaccines, coronavirus vaccines, are still more effective in the setting of preventing moderate and severe disease, even with the variants. But that is a very good question. Let me just add as well, just to round up this topic a little bit. All the more reason you and I need to continue to wear our masks Ensure that we are exercising all of the precautions, social distancing at 6 feet, washing your hands. And when we get together outdoors or even indoors, make sure that there's sufficient ventilation in the room. Those things will not, they're even more important now as these variants enter the market and actually become the predominant strain of COVID virus within the community. It is not the time to back off. It is not the time to become lax with appropriate mask fitting and appropriate safety precautions. Very good question. Mr. Mays, do you have a question? I think you're muted.
Yeah, it looks like she's trying to get.
Yes, I was, excuse me, I was muted, but I received the vaccine, Pfizer vaccine yesterday. And the only thing is
second dose or
this
first?
is my first dose.
Okay, good, congratulations.
Yeah. And what you answered that we will have some effects from it, which is my arm is very sore and I felt tired, but then I didn't come straight home after I got the shot. I had some errands to run. So, but that's it. So far, I mean, my whole family, my nephew got his second shot on Thursday from his employment. And my sister and my 86-year-old aunt got our first shot yesterday. But that's the only thing I'm worried about is my shoulder hurting, my arm hurting. But one of the things a lot of people are afraid, even my daughter who works at a hospital and her employer, her administrator was trying to encourage her to get it. And she has some fear because she is a 2-time breast cancer survivor. And so she has her reservations. So I'm hoping she's watching. We'll watch this.
No, absolutely. Thank you for sharing your experience, and I'm optimistic for your daughter as well. Let me just say, 85% of people who receive the vaccine have a sore shoulder for 48 hours. Okay. I can tell you the first night that I received my vaccine, we were playing some board games at home and I couldn't even use my arm. I had to use the other arm to move the dominoes around on the table because it was so sore. But by 2 days, it will completely resolve. And I think the benefit that you will receive certainly outweighs the risk of having that sore arm. And the fatigue is not uncommon. Some people miss a day of work, or like yourself, it makes it a little challenging to run your errands. But within 48 to 72 hours, your energy will be back. And I think that's a small price to pay. Regarding your daughter, the safety profile of the Mrna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson vaccine for individuals who are immunocompromised and have cancer and actually receiving chemotherapy is really high. The safety profile is high, and we strongly encourage. It's like thinking in reverse. Certainly we want you to speak to your doctor, but the concern may be maybe I'm too frail or I don't have enough strength. And those are actually the individuals that are prioritized to get to the front of the line because the safety profile is there and the risk of infection, of an actual infection from COVID is greater. It's greater than the risk of receiving the vaccine. Imagine being immunocompromised. Imagine receiving chemotherapy or having had a liver transplant and now adding COVID infection to that. The benefits of actually receiving the vaccine outweigh the risks of not receiving it and actually contracting the infection. So I strongly encourage your daughter to speak to her physician. But precisely those who have had cancer or are currently being treated for cancer, they are the extremely vulnerable that we are prioritizing now in the state strategy, as well as our local health strategy.
What do you recommend to do for the soreness? I applied an ice pack on it last night, but what do you recommend?
Yeah, so an ice pack, if that provides some relief, that is good to do. There is some literature that suggests, you know what, if you were to take Tylenol or take some of the pain medicine, how might that affect your immune response? So there's, depending on what you read, they may suggest that you not take the Tylenol to help with some of that pain. Some of the literature says that it's okay to take the Tylenol. If you don't need to take the medication, I would not. And if you're getting relief with something cold on your shoulder, or I would use that as a route. But if it's really debilitating and you have to take Tylenol or something along those lines over the counter to help manage the pain, then you should do so.
Okay, thank you.
But within 2 or 3 days, you'll be wondering, you'll be wondering, was it really that sore? Because it's sore for the first day or two.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. St. Clair.
Yeah.
I also had got both my shots, and the first one gave me a really bad headache, but I suffer from migraine, so they told me to expect that. So I slept the whole day.
Mhm.
And the second shot, it hurt my arm, but not so much, but it gave me narcolepsy. I slept and slept and slept and slept for like a whole day. So are those symptoms something that people can expect to have?
So absolutely. If you look at the data, again, in terms of the headache, 40 to 50% of people who receive either the Pfizer or Mrna vaccine suffer with headaches. The most common, again, side effects are muscle aches, myalgias, chills, headache, fatigue. Some even have a low-grade fever. So it is not uncommon, and to be honest with you, depending on which scientists you read and which data you read, that is widely expected because you are beginning an immune response to the vaccine. And your immune response creates antibodies. Your immune response kicks in what they call T cells. Your immune response gets interleukin and all of these fancy words. It activates that immune response within your body. And that immune response, which you also see with an infection, which the vaccine does not cause, but what you also see with an infection is an immune response where, think about when you've had a cold or a flu, your muscles ache, it's the same, although it's not from an infection. It's a normal reaction to the vaccine as your body's doing what it should do if it were the actual virus. So the response that you had with the headache, the insomnia or the narcolepsy is more rare. That's not commonly reported. It may have been a sign more of extreme fatigue, but it doesn't mean that there was any adverse or inappropriate response to the vaccine. There's a whole spectrum of symptoms that folks can experience. The most common I mentioned, and we've been talking about the headache, the myalgia, the sore arm, the low-grade fever, those things are common, but I would say that it's still within the realm of what would have been a normal response. A lot of folks were really fatigued and stayed home from work and rested and slept anyways because of that extreme, the degree of fatigue that they were feeling. So it's well within the spectrum of what is known. And really, this is what we monitor folks for immediate reaction. And then the side effect profile is common, much more common than the flu. the headache, the myalgia, the chills, the low-grade fever, backache some people experience. Some even have nausea. 1 in 20 people, 5% of people feel nauseous. That's all within a normal spectrum and well worth the 2 to 3 days that you may experience that to have the degree of protection that it provides.
Dr. Sinclair?
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's Yoma. I have a question.
Sure.
How do you answer this fact? According to reports submitted to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, as of January 29th, at least 501 people have died after receiving the COVID-19 vaccines. These numbers were reflected in the reports filed between December 14th, 2020 and January 29th, 2021. The data comes from the CDC's Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS, a federal program that collects information regarding adverse events that occur after a person receives a vaccine.
Thank you for the question. That's a very good question. And it's a question that we need to face. People who have received the vaccine and subsequently die. I don't know that actual report that you have there, if they died from COVID or what the cause of the death was.
They said it was after they received the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine.
Yeah, I would actually like to know more about the time interval between receiving the vaccine and when they died, as is in that report. And I would also like to know the cause of the death. I don't know if what you have there describes what the cause of the death was. Does it say that in the report?
Yes, they said the cause was after they received the COVID-19 vaccine.
Yes. So this is why I'm trying to be clear about the details of what they're reporting, because there's a difference between you receive the vaccine and within 10 minutes you die from anaphylaxis. That clearly is a reaction to the vaccine. Your throat swells, you get sweaty, your heart rate increases, and they need to emergently administer epinephrine and perhaps even put a breathing tube in to assist your breathing. That's an anaphylactic reaction that occurs after the vaccine. You could also receive the vaccine and after the vaccine not have an anaphylactic reaction. 4 days later, be exposed to someone with COVID, still get COVID infection, and be admitted to the hospital, be admitted to and transferred to the intensive care unit, and succumb to COVID-19. So, even though the vaccine is effective in preventing 95% of moderate and severe disease, it does not, to be clear, eliminate the risk of COVID infection. There's still that 5%. So what I'm not clear in the data that you shared and what I would like to have more information on is whether those individuals died. Yes, they died after receiving the vaccine, but did they die from anaphylaxis, which you see within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, sometimes perhaps a little bit longer, 30 minutes after receiving the vaccine? Or are we talking about they died from COVID days to weeks later from having contracted the infection, which we know can still occur after the vaccine? It's really important to know that the 95% effectiveness in prevention of severe and moderate COVID infection is not 100%. That is still not a reason to say, it's not 100% effective, let me not do it. Because our goal for you and for your health and safety is to take 95% and to make the right decisions about your health and protecting the health of your family and those within your neighborhood. I'm sorry, the sun is shifting here. I'm just going to tilt myself a little bit. So I would like to get more information about the cause of death and look into those reports for those that have received the vaccine, knowing that, as I said before, even within the state of Florida, with over 20 million residents, you can imagine that with 1 in 500,000 people suffering from an anaphylactic reaction, that in a state of over 20 million people, we will see a handful of folks that will have an anaphylactic reaction. They will not die. I shouldn't say they will not die. Simply because you have an anaphylactic reaction doesn't mean you will die, but they will require extra treatment as well as monitoring to prevent the vaccine from causing death. So from anaphylaxis. So your data that you're sharing from the CDC website, I don't have any question about the data or the report that you read, but I would like to know more details about that, the cause of death. I know it was after the vaccine, but there are multiple things that people can die from after receiving the vaccine, including COVID.
Doctor, we have a
Yes.
question that's coming in from a chat from Dino. Says, Dr. St. Clair, can you speak a little about the nanoparticles? What do they do, and what is their purpose in being part of the vaccine?
That's a great question. You're getting into the biochemistry and the pharmacokinetics of the vaccine. That question came from, what is his or her name?
Dino. And
Dino.
Dino?
Yes, and they also said, I understand that Israel has a vaccine that has been remarkably successful as a treatment for COVID-19, but we have not heard anything about this vaccine. What can you tell us about this treatment? Sure.
I'll answer. Dino must be a scientist or a pharmacist or something. And if they aren't, they should be. So to your first question, nanoparticles. So the nanoparticles, think of a child at Disney blowing one of those little expensive toys that blows bubbles. Imagine a bubble floating in the air. Nanoparticles are that bubble. It's a lot of nanoparticles put together to create almost like a sphere. The challenge with the mRNA vaccine is that even though the messenger RNA is really, think of it as a photocopy of genes. There are instructions telling your cell how to create the proteins that you now will develop antibodies against. Instructions. How do we get instructions into your cell? Your cell does not like to have a foreign material injected into them. If you can think of it in those rather simplistic terms, I'm really simplifying the biochemistry of this. So in order to get the instructions into your cell so that you can begin to, the immune response of developing antibodies, those instructions need to be wrapped in a bubble, so that the bubble itself makes its way through your cell lining, and the instructions are now available inside of your cell. So nanoparticles are all the particles that come together to create that bubble, that make it possible for the instructions to enter your cell. They kind of shield the instructions as they make their way through the lining of your cell. The anaphylactic reactions that have occurred secondary to Pfizer and Mrna, have been to those nanoparticles. As I mentioned before, there are no preservatives in the vaccine. So there's no egg component, there's no pieces of anything else to preserve it going forward. So it's the nanoparticles that scientists believe and that the manufacturer believes is what's causing the anaphylactic reaction. There's no good way for us to test whether or not you are potentially allergic to the point of anaphylaxis to those nanoparticles. That's the challenge of saying who should and should not receive the vaccine because they've had an anaphylactic reaction before. There are nanoparticles apparently in shampoo and some other products, but there's no good way to know whether or not you are allergic to nanoparticles and thereby should not receive the first dose of an mRNA vaccine. If you actually have an anaphylactic reaction to the first dose, it is presumably due to the nanoparticles that have been injected in you and you're allergic to those. And it is the only contraindication, we say, the only reason to not get the second dose is an anaphylactic reaction to those nanoparticles in the first dose. So to answer your question very simply, the nanoparticles are the multiple particles that come together to create the bubble around the instructions, the messenger RNA, so that it can easily enter your cell. Because in and of itself, just think of a photocopy of a piece of paper. This is the messenger RNA. There's no way this gets in your cell, so it really needs to be wrapped in a bubble so that it can enter. You asked a very good question about Israel and the work that they are doing in terms of vaccinating their population and in terms of reaching that point of herd immunity. They have developed, and there are over 200 ongoing studies and or actual development of vaccines against COVID. There's a whole slew in Russia and other parts of the world. Israel is working on their components and their product as well. But I must say that our Food and Drug Administration is the agency that reviews all of the data, and I don't know how they go about deciding manufacturers really can apply or really bring their product to the American market place. I know certainly Pfizer and Mrna, and as late as yesterday, Johnson & Johnson. But there are others that we may see, not necessarily the Israeli product, one of their products, but there's AstraZeneca, there's Novavax, and there's multiple manufacturers on the market. But how the Food and Drug Administration goes about making their decision that yes, Pfizer, yes, Mrna will present to their body, their regulatory body, yes, Johnson & Johnson, subsequently AstraZeneca, how they make that decision, I really cannot share with you today.
Doctor, I have another question.
What question do you know?
Okay.
I have a Facebook question. He's been waiting a minute. David is asking, isn't there any other way other than the vaccine? And if so, is it survival without the vaccine pretty much 99.5%?
I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question? Is there any
other way than taking the vaccine? And he said, isn't survival without the vaccine pretty much 99.5%?
Survival without the vaccine. Let's take the first.
I guess what he's trying to say is, do we really have to have the vaccination? Because there's people who've gotten COVID and haven't died from it, who basically survived from it. So I guess that's where he's going.
No, that's a very good a point and question that you are asking. There's really only two ways to develop antibodies to the Corona 19 virus. Either you are naturally infected by another individual who has the infection, so you develop antibodies that provide protection for what we believe to be up to 90 days. That immunity wanes with time. It's really strong early on. And to be honest with you, the degree of your infection, whether it's mild or moderate or severe, really doesn't dictate how robust your immune response is and how robust the antibodies are that you develop. But we know with time, by 3 months, you don't have the same protection that you had initially after a natural infection. The only other way to develop antibodies is through the vaccination. And we know that the vaccine does more than just develop antibodies. The vaccine also creates memory within your T cells. That's another type of immune cell. So that even when your antibody levels go down, and we're studying now, and what's been discovered is that the immunity that you acquire after a vaccination may actually last longer than the natural infection. And what we know is, as I was saying a moment ago, you have T cells in your immune response. They're called memory T cells that have a memory for your exposure to the coronavirus. And this is to the virus developed as a response to the vaccine. So we know that the vaccine does more than just create antibodies. It really kicks off the entire immune response, resulting in Sister May's sore arm, and in some of the others who have reported some headache and so on. That response is a robust response that the studies are demonstrating provide immunity that goes even longer than an actual infection. So those are the two routes to developing antibodies to the virus. There's really no other mechanism to achieve that. Your second question was a very important one. Yes, individuals, the majority of people who are infected with coronavirus do not die. You are right. The majority of people who are infected with coronavirus actually don't even get hospitalized. And that's a good thing. The bad thing is, as I mentioned before, you don't know if you are going to be that individual who is hospitalized. You're more likely to be that individual who is hospitalized if you have other health problems. You actually don't even know if you are that individual who would not be hospitalized but would be in the intensive care unit. There's no way of accurately predicting what your course of infection will be. So the thought that the majority of people, and many folks have COVID and live, the point I believe, and the science suggests, that it's not simply to live. Even after, as I mentioned before, a mild, moderate, or severe infection, 10% of you, 1 in 10 people, continue to have long-term symptoms. And I don't mean something as mild as long-term sore arm or long-term itch. I mean long-term loss of smell, or long-term loss of taste, or poor memory, foggy concentration, a chronic cough, fatigue. 1 in 10. And let me just add to that, it's a very good question. Let me just add that now with the variants, those mutations, the UK variant, which is on the rise in the United States, more contagious. The South African variant, which is more contagious and more lethal. The Brazilian variant, you're going to read about the California variant and the New York variant. With the rise of these variants, that those who have had COVID from the original variant in the past and survived are potential hosts for the variants as well. There are clearly documented evidence, there is clear documented evidence of reinfection of COVID. I had it before, 4 months later, 5 months later, I have it again. And with these variants, it's almost like a new exposure. So let me just summarize that response to a great question, that you do not know whether you will be one of those that, quote, simply survives or is hospitalized or actually is admitted to the intensive care unit or passes away. You don't know that. The likelihood is greater if you're older in age or if you have other health conditions, but you don't know what your course will be. And even if you've been infected before and think, oh, I'm done with this, I'm good, you're actually not. There are variants, and there's strong literature suggesting that a reinfection is possible. Great question.
There is a question from Miss Judith. She said, for patients who are bedridden, how will they get the COVID vaccination and when?
You're asking another, I mean, all we're getting today are great questions. Patients can be bedridden for a number of reasons. And I believe that our strategy from a health system standpoint, or even from a state standpoint, Department of Health, your local health county department, really needs to think through how we will vaccinate those that are harder to reach. Many of our strategies now focus on you coming to us, as effective as that is, and it will reach the vast majority of the population. But for those that are bedridden, for those that cannot, and they're highly vulnerable, we will need to have a strategy that reaches out to them in their homes. We will need to engage home health agencies in providing that home-based or that residential housing community or facility care. We will have to leverage the home health part of care in providing vaccines to those that really cannot get out to our facilities and don't have the transportation that many of us truly and frankly enjoy. But that's another great question. I think home health agencies and a strategy that resources them and funds that channel is the route to doing that.
Okay, and we have another question. Thank you for sharing. Miss Deborah said, if someone has COVID-19, should they still be vaccinated?
Thank you very much, sir.
That's a great question. The current recommendations from the Center for Disease Control are, if you are currently infected with COVID, you should recover fully from the illness before being vaccinated. That's typically a 10 to 14 day, depending on the severity of your COVID illness. If you were moderately or mildly ill, then a 10 to 14 day period from the time of developing symptoms and being from the time you develop symptoms and you're symptom free now, a total of 10 to 14 days before being vaccinated for against the COVID-19 virus. Those are the current guidelines, and they're clear within the Center for Disease Control. There are also other reasons for which you may want to talk to your doctor about postponing the virus, the vaccine, but it's typically if you're already in the course of receiving other vaccines, vaccines for shingles or tetanus vaccine. We did encounter some instances where that was the case. And really, you have to weigh the benefits of delaying the COVID vaccine because you're already receiving another vaccination. But to your question specifically about COVID, you really need to completely resolve from a symptom and a fever standpoint the acute illness before receiving the COVID vaccine. And we strongly recommend even those who have had COVID in the past. We've been talking now about the variants and about how reinfection can occur and how your immunity wanes with time, meaning by 3 months, you don't have the strength of the T cells, the strength of the antibodies, the strength of the whole host of other cells that are part of your immune reaction. We strongly recommend that folks who have had COVID also receive the vaccine.
Thank you. There is a Miss Armanda who wants to speak. I'm going to unmute her.
My question is, due to the different variants of the COVID-19, would the vaccine be required annually?
That's a great question. All you all have done is ask great questions. So I'm sorry I start them off that way, but they truly are. I do not work for Pfizer or Mrna or Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Novavax. I don't work for any of the manufacturers, but really, I believe that we will have the need for booster vaccines going forward. I don't know if it will be annual. I don't know if it will be in a 9-month window. I don't know if it will be a 1.5 years. But I would say to you all, and this is just me now speaking among friends, that let's prepare our minds to receive, at a minimum, an annual vaccine against COVID-19. And I would frankly even say that the benefits of avoiding COVID infection, severe and moderate infection, the benefits of that, I would be willing to even have the inconvenience of twice a year having to be vaccinated. Imagine getting your first vaccine in a worst case scenario, and to prevent the symptoms and the havoc that COVID wreaks on our lives and our community. Imagine having to 6 months later stop at your local CVS or Walgreens or wherever, get your vaccine, sit down for a few minutes, and then go about your business. That's hardly an inconvenience. So I would say that I prepared myself mentally for an annual vaccine, an annual booster, because we have already seen that variants are a normal course of business. Viruses mutate because they realize, Armanda and Courtney are no longer appropriate hosts. They already have antibodies. They've already been vaccinated. Let me see, Galaxy Note 20 has not, but how am I going to infect them? Maybe if I change a component, I can be more contagious. And actually, not even more contagious, more lethal. And then they go after Galaxy Note 20 that I'm seeing here with a vengeance, simply because Armanda and Courtney were not appropriate hosts, or they were running into barriers. So they are trying to survive, and they mutate to survive. And their mutations don't make them milder, their mutations make them worse, clearly. So it's normal for viruses to do that. And that's why every year there are several strains of the flu virus out, and you get one injection that covers multiple strains because it is a normal phenomenon. Prepare yourself to annually, and again, I'm not trying to speak into what that will be. Will it be 6 months, 9 months, 15 months? But prepare yourself at least on an annual basis to require a booster. It would only be normal and consistent with the flu vaccine if you want to use that as a comparison.
Thank you. Okay, there is a Miss Olga.
Thank you.
She asked,
Sure.
any word on when the virus will abate?
When the
Or
virus will
subside.
That is the $1 million question. So I can't give you a date or a time, but what the science tells us is that when 70% of us, 70, and depending what you read, some say 65, some say as high as 80. The point being, when approximately 70% of us have either had natural infection, and we talked about that, why go down that route when you don't know whether your infection will be mild, moderate, severe, intensive care unit, mortality? You don't know. Or any one of those, and I live, but I no longer can smell. Okay. So either we get to the point of 70% of us going that route, or going the route of vaccination, whereby for 2 days to 3 days, like Sister May's, we experience these symptoms. Some of them are really distressing to the shoulder, to the head, to the back. But thereafter, we have antibodies and memory T cells and T4 cells and a whole immune response that is robust, that provides protection for months at a time. When we get to that point, 70%, then we are at a stage where the virus is under control to the point that it's very hard for it to find someone new to infect. That's where we want this to go. And at the time that it's struggling, when 70% of us have developed immunity, at that time, it starts to slow down. More of us are not getting infected, and those that it infects, the majority of them are like a common cold. It's not destroying our economy, destroying our lives, destroying our families, destroying our happiness. That is the point we are looking at. What that date will be depends on all of you on this call and how effectively we encourage and spread the word of getting vaccinated versus waiting for natural immunity, because in that wait, you expose yourself to so much risk of perhaps severe disease, risk of having symptoms that are long-term. I don't know. I love oatmeal cookies, and if I couldn't smell oatmeal cookies for the next 6 months or 9 months or who knows how long, it'd be very difficult. I just trivialize it to say that the symptoms that we can experience from COVID long-term, not having the concentration you used to have, feeling fatigued. Today is a beautiful day outside. Summer's coming. Who wants to be dragging around? We want to have energy. And let's do it by getting vaccinated.
Okay, and Miss Yoma said, Dr. Sinclair, this was recently reported. Pfizer admits vaccine does not prevent COVID, and she gave an article. So I'm not sure if she wants you to elaborate, but most likely. So
Sure. Yeah, I don't know about that article from Pfizer stating that it does not, the words you used were prevent COVID. Were those the words? Sorry.
Oh, I was on mute. Sorry. It does
Did
not
I
prevent
hear you?
COVID.
Yeah.
It does not prevent COVID.
It doesn't prevent COVID. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that article, especially from Pfizer. All of the data that they have shared thus far and with their ongoing research is that the Pfizer vaccine is 95% effective in reducing severe and moderate disease. So you can, and I've been very clear with this, and I think Pfizer is being transparent. I cannot speak to that article, sorry, but I must add that you can still contract COVID infection after Pfizer vaccine. After Mrna vaccine, same, and after Johnson & Johnson. A matter of fact, after all of the vaccines, you can still contract COVID. That is not a reason to not get the vaccine. When you have a 95% effective vaccine, as Pfizer is, that prevents severe and moderate disease, and the numbers are clear. If you look at the thousands of patients that they have studied in multiple settings, across multiple races and in multiple demographic, imagine if you were infected by COVID, you had Pfizer vaccine like myself, and the vaccine was no worse than a cold, meaning you had mild infection, you were not hospitalized, you did obviously not die, you were able to carry out your normal daily activities. I would take that any day than exposing myself potentially to moderate and severe disease, which many times requires, certainly severe requires hospitalization. So without playing on words, Pfizer vaccine, following Pfizer vaccine vaccination, you can still be infected with the COVID virus. That is clear. But the infection is most likely going to be a mild infection. Highly unlikely that it is moderate to severe because the vaccine is 95% effective against that degree of illness. And that really is not to play on words, but to really describe the truth about vaccines. They do not eliminate COVID. The goal of vaccination is to get to the point whereby for you, the illness is, for the most part, mild, and whereby for the community, we're at that 70% immunity. So the existing virus that's within the community actually runs out of people to infect severely or to infect at all. And those that get infected are mildly infected as well. I don't know if any of you were scheduled to have elective surgery over the course of the summer or into the fall, but we had to close down our hospital for elective surgery. People who needed, hysterectomy, knee replacement, prostate surgery, simply because we didn't have the capacity to safely provide COVID care, as well as care to members of the community that needed elective surgery. We don't want that to happen. Herd immunity gets us to the point whereby the infection is mild, our hospital doors stay open to providing the care that our communities need, and you and I don't spend our days and nights, sorry about that, the sun is setting here. You and I don't spend our days and nights in the hospital with COVID. That's the goal. So it's not to play or to splice words with the data that you have about Pfizer and its effectiveness. Its effectiveness is without question, but you can still certainly be infected with COVID-19 after being vaccinated.
Hey, doctor, I have a,
yes.
All right, doctor, I have another message here from our YouTube community. It's Crystal.
Sure.
Does the vaccine change your DNA? I am hearing conflicting messages. I don't know if you can handle that one, Doc.
So Crystal, Crystal's her name? Great question. And let me give you an analogy. This is how I think about this, and I think this is how we should think about this. The messenger RNA is a photocopy. Imagine you have a recipe book in your kitchen, and it's in a drawer in your kitchen. That recipe book has a recipe for making chocolate cake, oatmeal cookies, and tarts. What you want to do is make oatmeal cookies. And I already told you I love oatmeal cookies. So you will photocopy the recipe for oatmeal cookies, and you'll put it on the counter in your kitchen. Then you will put the recipe book back in the drawer in your kitchen. You will now use that photocopy to make oatmeal cookies. I can smell them already. I use that analogy when I think about messenger RNA and DNA. Messenger RNA is a photocopy of DNA instructions. So that recipe book is your DNA sitting in a drawer in your kitchen, the nucleus of your cell. So think of the drawer as the nucleus and the recipe book with all of those instructions for multiple types of desserts being the DNA. The messenger RNA is the photocopy sitting on your counter on how to make oatmeal cookies. But in this case, that messenger RNA photocopy is how to make what they call the spike protein. That's the protein that the virus uses to attach to your cell. If we could make those spike proteins ourselves and not rely on a natural infection to bring it into our body and have the virus attached to our cells, if we could just make copies of the attachment, make copies of the glue part, not the virus, just the sticky part that makes it stick to our cells, then we can make antibodies to those sticky parts. And if we are exposed to a virus, it still enters our nasal passage, it still enters our mouth, it still can get into our body from us touching our eyes. But we've already created antibodies to the sticky part because we created those antibodies from the messenger RNA instructions in the kitchen. Instead of making oatmeal cookies, we made the sticky part of the virus. So that's the analogy I use really to suggest that the DNA is in the nucleus. You cannot take the oatmeal cookies photocopied instructions or recipe and somehow get it back into the drawer and into the recipe book. That's not how messenger RNA works. In the same way, that's not how the instructions to making oatmeal cookies get back into the recipe book. After the messenger RNA photocopies are used to make the sticky part of the virus that we now make antibodies to, it gets broken down and dissolved within the kitchen, within what they call, here's a word you probably never heard, within the cytoplasm of your cell. They get destroyed. They don't make their way back into the nucleus. They don't make their way back into the recipe, doesn't make its way back into the recipe book in the kitchen drawer. You made your cookies, you now shred the recipe and you throw it in the garbage. That's essentially the analogy of what happens. So messenger RNA does not change, does not reinsert itself back into your DNA. Actually, it doesn't reside in the DNA. It is a photocopy of instructions found on your DNA. So I hope that analogy helps with understanding that the messenger RNA is a photocopy of instructions for making the sticky part of the virus, the part that makes it stick to our cells so that it can do damage. When we make, from the messenger RNA instructions, when we make that sticky part, our body can then make antibodies to that sticky part. And when we are exposed to the virus, we already have antibodies present to the sticky part. So I hope that helps, Crystal, but let me use that analogy and go back to a question that I believe was shared right before that about Pfizer saying it does not prevent infection. And I really don't want to speak too much to that article because I did not read it and I'm not fully aware of what they were alluding to. But vaccines do not prevent you from getting COVID virus into your body through your nose, your mouth, or your eyes. It doesn't do that. You still have and can be exposed to the virus. It will still be within your system, if I can use those terms. What the vaccine does, it allows you to make antibodies to the sticky part of the virus without being exposed to the virus itself. So when the virus now comes in with its suction cups and is going to suction cup stick to your cell, you have already created antibodies to the suction cups. So the virus cannot attach to your cells. It cannot do damage. It can't take, residence on your cell because it is unable to do that. The antibodies block the suction cups from sticking to your cells. And what we're finding with the variants is that those suction cups, those what they call spike proteins, those spike proteins have modified to the point that they have greater suction, which makes them more infectious. And future research is going to look at how those doses or those booster shots that we get in the future potentially are designed specifically to create new antibodies for those new, more sticky suction cups. It's the suction cups that have changed and that have mutated in these new variants that make them more adherent. And the term for that more adherent is they are more infectious. But great question, and I'm glad it allowed me to pivot a little bit to address one of the earlier questions.
Dr. Sinclair, I'd like
Yes.
to interject here because I work in the medical field.
Yeah.
And I noticed that a lot of people are having very hesitant to the COVID vaccination, but they have no hesitation for the flu vaccination. And they basically are to prevent us from getting either sicker from catching the flu itself or spreading it. So how can we get people to realize that this vaccination is not something that's we're out to say we want to kill you with it? We're just trying to say we want to protect you just like we want to protect you with the flu shot.
What is your name?
My name is Condra.
Condra, you hit the nail on the head. Vaccine hesitancy is a problem, even among healthcare workers. And you'll find that there's many, sometimes depending on where you look and what you read, as many as 50% or more in some settings of people who work on the front lines who say, no, not me. And it goes to some of those reasons that I listed in my initial slide, but that you're hearing. concern about side effects. Is it safe? I don't trust it. Maybe it was, the previous administration that concocted this thing and they want to inject a chip or they want to control me. Perhaps there are other sicker people that should be getting it. It's not for me. I'm healthy. I don't need it. Does it even work? It's only 95%. It's not 100%. There's all of those concerns. And the point for us in healthcare, and even for those that are not in healthcare, is for us to answer to those questions with facts and with truth. There's a great deal of skepticism about whether or not we are going to be tracked or whether or not there's something in this, a chip or something along those lines. And I just want to say, if you have a cell phone, the potential for being tracked is already there. They don't need to inject a chip. There are mechanisms to know exactly what you're doing, where you've been, where you're going, what you're thinking, when you sleep, when you work. We have all these apps that collect our heart rate and our blood. We don't need a chip, and there is no chip in this vaccine. This is really about saving lives, restoring our community back to its health, restoring our economy, giving many of us here back the joy of being together and hugging each other. This is what it's about, and really making this coronavirus, just like the other 4 coronavirus strains that cause 40% of the common cold. That is what vaccination does when we get to that 70% immunity point. But we at Advent Health are going out into our communities. We are going out where you and I, where we live, where we breathe, and where we congregate. We are aggressive about our initiatives to attend, if not on a virtual platform, those churches that are meeting in person, the hair salons, the barber shops, the stores that we go to get the word out and to answer the questions that folks have with truth. There's a lot of false information that's present, obviously, on social media, and it unfortunately allows someone with an alternative motive to promote their agenda. There really should be no agenda other than restoring our health and allowing us to be safe to our brothers and sisters. So you're absolutely right, Crystal, about the degree of hesitancy that exists even among healthcare professionals. And our job is to do something about that, to be responsible in addressing the concerns with truth that folks have. And being clear, the goal is not to eliminate COVID. Yes, that would be a great and lofty goal, but the goal is to achieve herd immunity so that when COVID-19 infects the few people for whom immunity is not strong, it is a mild infection. We will get our lives back when we get to that point.
Okay, thank you. We
You're
had
welcome.
a comment that was made by a young girl. I guess she left. She said, I absolutely against all vaccination, flu, and more. I just wanted to make that comment that when I hear that, thank goodness they weren't against polio vaccination when it came out, because a lot of us probably would not be here. So yes, and honestly, as adults, we have the right and in this country to make decisions about our health and our safety. And as Christians, we are required to treat our bodies as God's temple and to make wise decisions about our health, whether it relates to vaccines or what we eat and how much we sleep and the exercise we get, how we relate to one another. We have the liberty to make decisions.
My goal today, and I think the point of this session, is to dispel false information and to fill you with truth and to fill you with scientifically backed evidence. And then to leave the decisions to us as adults to make the right decisions for ourselves. If at the end of this discussion or at the end of your own reading, not reading that's influenced by false information, but if at the end of your review of all of the data and all of the information that's available, that you choose not to be vaccinated with the COVID vaccine or flu vaccine or measles, mumps, rubella, or HPV, or any vaccine, that is a decision that you have to make and you have the right to make and you should make for yourself, realizing that there are implications of a public health nature that are important. But the goal, again, is for me to share with you truth so that when you make a decision that you are the rightful owner to make, it's an informed one and one that is not made with false information or out of fear.
Thank you, Dr. Sinclair. Okay,
Sure.
we are going to try to close now, but we do have 3 people that I know that wanted to speak. I know Mr. Dino had a question, Ms. Yorma, and Ms. Lucretia. So I will let Ms. Lucretia speak at the moment, and I'm going to take her off of mute.
Sure.
Is she off? Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Dr. Sinclair, thank you.
Hi. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. One of the things that I disagree, one of the things that I agree with one of the ladies who even said something concerning the flu vaccine, because I'm frontline as well at a hospital, very busy hospital. I totally disagree with the vaccinations. When one of the things that I have noticed, the 16, 17 years I've been working at this hospital, they have had it mandatory for people to take the flu shots. And I refused them the majority of the time. But when I did not, I have become so very ill. Literally, when I refuse the flu shots and those around me are taking the flu shots, my thing is I wear a mask. I have no problem wearing a mask. One of the things that I've noticed is that the people who do take the flu shots, their colds or flus linger forever, and they don't seem to shake the symptoms anytime soon. And I don't know if it will be the same thing with the COVID vaccine. The same thing with, but when I do the things naturally, if I do get it from like naturally by air, all the people that we are working with on the front line, then I take my little remedies and I'm over it in a few days, literally 2 to 3 days, where these people are out for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And they're still out and still coming in, spreading their nasty germs, coughing on people. See, I have a problem with things like that. And one of the things that you mentioned is it's not necessarily the vaccination for the COVID. You said that it is the vaccination carrier that you guys are giving, that they will be doing the vaccine for. Is this correct?
Say that again.
The carrier for the vaccine, so that it will not bind to us. Is this correct?
So there's they
you were saying the sticky cups, yeah.
I'm sorry?
What you were saying about the suction cups,
Yes.
The binder that would hold it to us is what the vaccine is prepared for, not necessarily to prevent COVID, but so that it cannot stay with us, so that it flushes right on through the system or is able to be quickly removed, right?
Correct. So I'm calling those suction cups, the actual term is the spike protein.
Okay.
So what we create, so the messenger RNA instructions tells your cells how to make those spike proteins. The problem isn't the spike protein. The spike protein is the suction cup. That's not the problem. The problem is the suction cup is attached to the virus, which can do harm in that once it attaches to your cell, it now enters the cell and it gets your cell to make multiple copies of itself, infect other cells that it now instructs to make multiple copies of itself. And that's how the virus actually spreads throughout your body, affecting your organs. So it's not the suction cup. It's when the virus attached to the suction cup enters your cell because it was able to attach to the cell in the first place. So your body, with the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, makes suction cups. And then your body makes antibodies to the suction cups so that when you go to the party or to the gathering or go to work, frankly, on Monday, and someone coughs on you, and 4 days later, you develop COVID symptoms, your body already has antibodies, and the antibodies will attach to the suction cup. So you know what? You may not actually even develop symptoms because it did not even have the ability to attach to your cells. It's when you don't have that antibody protection that the virus, 4 days after you've been exposed, has attached to your cells and caused the symptoms. So the interesting thing is, it doesn't prevent you from having the virus enter your nasal passage or enter your oral cavity or your nasal pharynx or your eyes. It doesn't prevent that. It prevents it from doing harm by attaching to your cells because it can't attach. You already have developed antibodies to what would allow it to attach. And then a very complex immune process takes place that eliminates the virus without it even doing anything to you. That is the goal. That ultimately is the goal. And if I can just say, the interesting thing about the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines is that they do not, you are not injected with a component of the virus that causes the infection. Let me explain. The flu vaccine is an inactive virus. They've actually taken a flu vaccine and inactivated it, and then injected that so that you can develop antibodies to the flu virus. People who are severely immunocompromised are relatively contraindicated to receiving the flu vaccine because it's an inactive virus. And when you don't have a strong immune system, simply injecting an inactive actual virus is not advisable. The messenger RNA technology there's no component of coronavirus that is injected. None. What's injected, messenger RNA, is a photocopy of what's injected are instructions. Let me also add that the flu vaccine, there are preservatives. There's egg component in that. As we mentioned before, there's only nanoparticles and this messenger RNA instructions in the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. There's no preservatives. There's no inactive virus. There's no attenuated virus. There's no virus particles injected. So it's so I've had concerned community members before getting their vaccine. I called to the healthcare workers where they're receiving their vaccine. They say, every year I get the flu vaccine and I don't do well. I'm not sure if I should get this COVID vaccine, Pfizer or Moderna, when we were using those. And there's no contraindication to the COVID vaccine because of a response to the flu vaccine in the past. They're completely different platforms. One is an inactive virus, the flu, and there are preservatives. There are no preservatives in the mRNA vaccine, and there are no components of the virus either. So I like to give the advice that they're really two completely different vaccines, and your response will be completely different than what it had been with the flu. There's very little cross-reactivity. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, however, uses an inactive virus. They call it an adenovirus. Instead of nanoparticles, they use adenovirus to get small portions of that spike protein injected as part of their vaccine. So their vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, actually has a small component of the spike protein injected so that you can now be exposed to it and create antibodies. The mRNA vaccine, there's no components of any part of the virus injected at all. And that adds to that safety profile. It can be administered in severely immunocompromised individuals because the risk of the vaccine is actually lower than the risk of actual infection. It's the safety profile, I will use the words, remarkable. But very good point that you bring up.
Thank you. And I'm going to have Ms. Yorma speak because she had several questions. If Ms. Yorma, does she have to take herself off on mute? Maybe she walked away from us for a second. Ms. Yorma?
Well, while you're getting her up, I'm just going to wave at Sister Mays. I see her there sitting, staring straight at me.
Okay. And I know Mr. Dino had a question, so I am trying to look
Sure.
for that now. Okay, it says, Dr. Sinclair, there have been reports of people who have received the vaccine and afterwards had uncontrollable jerking movements to which there is no treatment to reverse. Can you speak on which percentage of the vaccinated population have developed these kinds of side effects? Should a person with tremors take the vaccine?
That's a very good question. And to be honest with you, I am not familiar with that data that speaks to the jerking movements. I thank you for actually bringing that up. And it is something that I will look into and further understand. I'm curious to know whether it is, whether that is following the Pfizer vaccine or the Mrna vaccine. I'd also like to know the time interval after which either one of those vaccines are administered to when those symptoms developed, and whether the individuals had a pre-existing condition related to those jerking movements. And I'd like to understand that more. I think that it's also important to, when we're looking and doing comparative studies, to look at placebo, which is the group of people that got salt water, if I can use that term, or saline, because you will read in the literature, and I will just say this in light of these jerking movements that were described. You will read in the literature that, you know what, one patient, after having received the Pfizer vaccine, developed Bell's palsy, which is a paralysis of half of the face that could be transient, and very quickly make the conclusion that Pfizer vaccine caused Bell's palsy. And you can very easily cause and effect. Receive vaccine, Bell's palsy, X number of days or weeks later. So they're clearly linked is what you would be led to believe. But when you look at the 30,000 or so individuals, candidates who received the placebo, there were 4 cases of Bell's palsy. So Bell's palsy occurs naturally within our community, more commonly in women than men. And when it occurs, it's usually it could be following a cold, and it's usually transient, meaning it lasts a number of weeks and then is resolved. So without knowing what the incidence of tremors is in those populations that, in the studies, that received the placebo, you would very quickly think that it's the vaccine that has done it, not realizing that if 50 people after having vaccinated millions of people with Pfizer, 50 people had tremors, perhaps in their studies. And this isn't to defend them. I just want to make sure that when we're looking at data, we're looking at the full data set. Perhaps in those patients who received placebo, and this is my homework, I will go back and look at the data that was shared with the Food and Drug Administration to understand what their own data showed. Perhaps people who received placebo, there were more than 50 that had tremors, unrelated, obviously, to the salt water they received, but as a natural consequence. So thank you for bringing up that point, and I would like to learn more about it and actually compare it to those potentially in their study group who may also have received a placebo to understand whether there was a cause and effect, or if it just was going to occur in those individuals, regardless of whether or not they received the vaccine. And it's just coincidental that the vaccine was administered. But a very good question.
So we have Miss Yarma. She has a lot of questions. I'm going to read it to you because she wanted to remain muted. So there is.
I'll try to keep my answers brief as well.
Okay. One of the first questions is, does the medical and science researchers know the long-term effects of mRNA in the vaccine?
That's a great question. We do not know the long-term effects from studying COVID-19. And clearly the approval of the vaccine, the emergency use authorization, I should call it the official term, that was granted, allows for us to continue to collect that data, us meaning Pfizer and Mrna, and as of yesterday, Johnson & Johnson, to continue to receive that data, and after a 6-month period, to formally present the full set of their data to the Food and Drug Administration, not simply for emergency use, which is under the pandemic conditions, but to make it fully approved to be used and to perhaps even be mandated. So the full effects continue to be studied, but I want to go back to what I said at the onset of today's discussion. Messenger RNA technology for creating immunotherapy and for use in human beings is not new. We have been using it on a smaller scale for the treatment and for the study of prostate cancer treatment, as well as small cell lung cancer treatments. So we have that safety profile at least to go on. And I think with the rate at which we are gladly vaccinating tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people with the Pfizer mRNA or Mrna mRNA vaccine, that we will have a robust set of data to look back on it and really do really look towards getting full approval, not just emergency use. So yes, there's still work to be done on fully understanding the impacts of the mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccines.
Thank you, Dr. Sinclair. She had another question.
Sure.
She's very knowledgeable. Dr. Sinclair, recently CBS News reported that some countries are mandating vaccine passports for people to travel. What is your response to that? This was taken from an article, nationalfiles.com, and it was reported by the New York Times.
So my response, so you're asking for my opinion.
Yes.
And I am, so the recommendation again is that there are countries that are, did you say requiring?
Well, she said correction. Some countries are planning to implement digital COVID-19 vaccine travel passports by 2022. Travel
passports. That being, I'm going to assume I have not read that that report. That being the passport suggesting that you either need to be vaccinated or showing evidence of vaccination to be granted entry into a particular country. Right now, COVID vaccine is not mandatory in the United States. It's been approved for emergency use. So without it being fully approved, which we anticipate will be coming with the full set of data and clinical trials, it is premature to make it mandatory for entry because it is really only approved for emergency use. There will come a time, I believe, when it is approved fully by the Food and Drug Administration, at which time I think only time will tell whether or not our government will look to do that. And clearly some countries have already moved in that direction, but we are not at that point yet in this country, as emergency use is the only authorization that has been granted.
Okay, thank you. And it says this recently reported from Summit News, vaccine manufacturer Merck has abandoned development of 2 coronavirus vaccines, saying that after an extensive research, it was concluded that the shots offered less protection than just contracting the virus itself and developing antibodies.
Sorry, was there a question?
I'm guessing she wants your opinion as well on that statement.
So,
you want me to read it again?
Sure, if you can, that would be fine.
Okay, it says this recently reported from Summit News, vaccine manufacturer Merck, I believe that's how you say it, has abandoned development. Merck, M-E-R-C-K?
Yes, Merck.
Has abandoned development of 2 coronavirus vaccines, saying that after extensive research, it was concluded that shots offered less protection than just contracting the virus itself and developing antibodies.
So, as I mentioned before, I do not work for Pfizer, Mrna, AstraZeneca, or Johnson & Johnson, or any of the other 100 manufacturers. But it is not easy work. It is not easy business. And not every vaccine manufacturer will demonstrate effectiveness. The Food and Drug Administration has set an effectiveness of 50% as the minimum threshold for which they would then allow for a hearing as to whether or not they would grant authorization for use on American people in our country. Not every manufacturer is going to meet that minimum threshold of 50%. Clearly, Johnson & Johnson has done it with an overall effectiveness of 66%, 72% effective against the original coronavirus in this country. Pfizer, Moderna, 95% effective, but not every manufacturer is going to meet that threshold. And I assume that with time, others will abandon coronavirus 19 vaccine manufacturing and go back to their other service lines and product lines that are more profitable and don't require as much research and development capital investment. So perhaps the vaccine that they created in their initial studies, and I don't know Merck's initial research, perhaps it provided no greater protection. Perhaps it was not effective. And if that is the case, I applaud them for the decision that they have decided to make. And those that continue to demonstrate from a scientific standpoint, efficacy in the 95, 66, 72% range, continue to do so and provide that product for our communities. But I think with time, we'll see many of them. And it just shows you that those that achieve 95% or 68% or 72%, it's real. Clearly, those that And Merck is not, they've been in the business forever, and this is what they do. They make vaccines and medications and therapeutics. They didn't just come, you know, they're the real deal. And when they step out because their product didn't meet the threshold, you have to even think that the Pfizers, the Modernas, the Johnson & Johnsons of the world that have products that have been shown in multiple countries, multiple demographic of individuals to be effective, there's something to be said for that. But a great point.
Doctor, we want to thank you so much for your time and answering all these questions. I'm going to pass this. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to your buddy, Sister Mays, to sum us up. You're on mute, Sister Mays.
Okay. Okay, there I am.
You're still muted.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sinclair. Really appreciate
the last programs they all put on, a lot of people been watching it.
Okay. Thank you very much for participating with us on our program and giving us all the information.
Oh, I think you muted yourself, Sister Mays.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Okay. Thank you again for all the information that you've given us today and where we can tell others who can go out and get the vaccine and spread the information. And we pray that the Lord be with you as you continue to educate the community about the vaccine and the different medical information out there for us. We hope that you'll come back soon again with some more information. And so thank you for taking time to answer all our questions. So we're going to get ready to close out. We're just going to invite everyone to continue to look at Mount Pisgah's website. So we'll be having some upcoming events that will soon be approved. And so we want you to come and join us so we can educate and provide resources to our community. Great things God has done and will continue to do with each and every one of us. Let us bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your grace and mercy. We thank you for allowing Dr. Sinclair to come and give us the information on the vaccine and so many questions that has been answered, and still there's others that are seeking. Now, Lord, help him and his staff and all the other medical providers out there help to take care of the community. And Lord, we're just asking you to just heal our world, heal our nation, Lord, heal our communities. And Lord, help us, Lord, to represent you in word, action, and deed. Help us to help our community by showing your love, by providing information, by giving resources. Lord, we ask you for healing for those who are suffering with COVID, Lord. We ask you to build them where they're torn down, make them stronger where they're weak. And Lord, be with all the providers, the frontline workers, and all those who are there to help us and to take care of us. Keep us, Lord, and give us a blessed week. Thank you for your beautiful Sabbath day. And thank you for the program. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for the time.
Amen.
Thank you for everyone who took the time to be here today and for the great questions that you've all asked. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you for coming, Dr. St. Clair.
And listen, COVID's not going away very fast, and neither am I. So if ever you have the time and you want to sit down and chat again in the future, I'm welcome to that.
Praise God.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Thanks
welcome.
for supporting.
All right. Bye.